This cannon currently sits facing the River Medway. Behind it is Rochester Castle. This cannon would have smashed Rochester Castle to bits with ease. During Rochester Castle's main era, it would have had projectiles, missiles thrown at it, not something like this. This is a Russian cannon, but what's it doing here? Well, it was captured by the British during the Crimean War. Now, many people will have heard of the Crimean War, but won't necessarily know what it's all about. Now, during the 1850s, Russia, under Tsar Nikolai I, went to war with Britain, France, and the Ottomans. Now, the main reason or the excuse for this war beginning was that the Orthodox Christians of Russia under Nikolai I wanted more influence in Palestine, and the Catholics, the Christians under Napoleon III of France, wanted more influence in Palestine, and this would also cause a rift among the Muslims in the region. Thus the Ottomans become somewhat irate. Now, Napoleon III, like his uncle Napoleon I, because this isn't Napoleon I I'm talking about, in case you don't know, this is Napoleon III, his nephew, who also proclaimed himself emperor, but wasn't quite as talented or as gifted as his warlike uncle. But that's by the by. So the argument in Palestine came to a head, and what would happen is the two groups, the Orthodox and the Catholics, would turn up and fights would ensue, because they'd be fighting over relics or locations and so on. Now, this caused the British to side with the French, but why? Why are they all fighting over Palestine? Well, one of the big concerns the British had was that the Russians were using it as a guise to take Istanbul. Now, if they had taken Istanbul, and the British were correct in this fear, it would have given them a monopoly on the waves, militarily or via shipping. Now, the British can't be having that, being king of the waves, ruling the waves, but unfortunately, when we did go to war, we was somewhat embarrassed, and it did pull into question our rule of the waves. Eventually, we would win the war, and a treaty in France, a Treaty of Paris, would be signed, which would basically humiliate the Russians, like what would happen later with Germany, with the Treaty of Versailles, and it was a humiliation of the Russians, and the resentment continued all the way down to Tsar Nikolai II, the final Tsar of Russia. This particular cannon actually has the crest of the Romanovs on top, and I love that. I love the history of the European monarchs, not just our monarchs. I love all of it, and I adore that we have this cannon. Does it belong in Russia? Probably, but I'm glad we have it all the same.
Video that you just saw a moment ago, you saw Mr. Vinnie Sullivan provide a good summary rundown of the history of this here cannon as can be construed from exactly what we know about the Crimean War. Now, in regards to religious interethnic conflict, that is usually a reason given when there are larger forces at work that either want to conduct land grab or produce grab, etc. throughout human history. Usually there is not only one cause for wars and interethnic conflicts, and so I would like to posit a few other reasons for the Crimean War, which would be, first of all, the fact that Ukraine and Crimea are a breadbasket of Europe, which means that the soil there is particularly fertile and it has maximal output and production. So the factions that were warring with each other in the Crimean War were basically trying to conduct a containment and control operation when it comes to Russian influence for trading ports in the Black Sea, as well as to have a monopoly or at least an oligopoly over the grain production of Ukraine and the general agricultural produce that Ukraine has been noted for being particularly competent at manufacturing, of course. This here cannon is a war trophy that the British stole from the Russians during the Crimean War of 1853 to 1856. This here cannon basically represents our colonial interethnic conflict exporting during the 1850s. Now, remember that in 1821, the Ottoman Empire had already been almost disbanded, partially disbanded, by the Anglo-Franco alliance at the Battle of Navarinos. And you can notice, in terms of the historical linearity and timeline of the events, what you will notice is that after the English and the French had basically, quote-unquote, liberated Greece and installed a puppet prince that died from a monkey's bite, shortly thereafter they were conducting interethnic conflict operations in order to promote control of routes, resources, commerce, and influence, basically, in Eastern Europe after they had pivoted from Greece to the Balkans. And so you find interethnic conflict being an export of the Britannic colonial empire as well as the Franco-colonial empire, though a great many decades of distrust and negativity between the Britannic and the Franco empires existed when it came to protecting their financial and influence-related interests in the rest of the world. They were not afraid at the time, because we know that they had already 30 years prior orchestrated the Greek Revolution of 1821. What is another revolution to them in 3 decades' time, after all? But that is a story for another time, ladies and gentlemen.
Just before we go, come and have a look at the Romanov symbol here, which is no longer in use.
The double-headed eagle, by the way, represents the ability to influence both the West and the East as a monarchy. And so this symbol was adopted since the Byzantine Empire, though the Russians became quite fond of it as well, because they thought of themselves as the new Roman Empire, and so they adopted this here originally Roman symbol, later Byzantine symbol, and later adopted by the Russians, though they would tell you that it has always been a part of their history, which may indeed be the case. The origination of the double-headed eagle was Rome. And so it symbolized and represented very specifically control over both the west and the east of the empire, because it was very important for empires to control their borders at the time, though it doesn't seem to be the case presently.
The eagles used to hold the shields of all the houses that they had within their power. So if you ever see a double-headed eagle with its wings spread, you'll notice within its wings are the various houses that would have worked for them.
And it represents an amalgam of influence, basically. The sum totality of houses combined in influence, power, dominion, and authority.
Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you soon.
Toodaloo for now.